behind the shimmering lights and red carpet smiles of Hollywood's golden age. A much darker truth has always lingered, a shadowed world where mystery, power, and fear intertwine. The movie industry built dreams, but it also buried secrets. Some deaths were too strange, too sudden, too conveniently explained. And the studios made sure the world never found out what really happened. These are the stories they worked tirelessly to erase, the deaths they turned into myths. The tragedies that still whisper through Hollywood's quiet halls. It began with Paul Byrne, the man who married the original platinum blonde, Jean Harlow. In 1932, just 2 months after their wedding, he was found dead in their home, naked with a bullet wound in his head and a strange note beside him. The police barely arrived before MGM's own fixers were already there, clearing evidence and crafting a story. They said Paul had taken his own life because he couldn't satisfy his glamorous new wife. That story hit the papers fast, too fast. What the world didn't know was that the studio was protecting more than Harlow's reputation. Witnesses later claimed they heard a violent argument before the gunshot. Others said Paul had a secret wife who had escaped a sanitarium just days before. 2 days after his death, she too was found dead, her body pulled from a river with no autopsy ever done. Every detail pointed to a setup, a carefully designed illusion to keep Hollywood's golden couple spotless. MGM's boss, Louis B. Mayer, made sure the official story stayed clean, and it did. Paul Byrne's death was ruled a suicide, and Jean Harlow went back to work as if nothing had happened. She never spoke about that night again, taking the truth to her grave 5 years later. 3 years later. Thelma Todd, the ice cream blonde who lit up comedy screens alongside the Marx Brothers, was found dead in her garage, slumped over her steering wheel, poisoned by carbon monoxide. She was 29. Police called it an accident, but the scene didn't make sense. She was dressed for a night out, her face bloodied, bruises on her body that no one explained. Friends said she hated the smell of exhaust and would never sit in a running car inside a garage. The night before her death, she'd been seen arguing at a party. Her business partner and former lover claimed he locked her out for staying out late, but his story changed over and over. Todd had recently opened her own restaurant, and gangsters wanted a piece of it. She said no and started getting threats. Soon after, she was dead. Evidence vanished. Her diary disappeared. The investigation stopped cold. The official cause was ruled suicide, but her mother never accepted it. Thelma's Cafe still stands today, haunted by the echoes of laughter and by the justice that never came. Then came the fall of Superman. On a quiet night in June 1959, George Reeves, the man who played the Man of Steel, was found dead from a gunshot to the head. He was supposed to be getting married, planning new roles, moving past the cape that had made him famous. But police called it suicide. The problem was, the scene didn't fit. There were no gunpowder burns, no fingerprints on the weapon, and 2 extra bullet holes in the floor. The body lay neatly on the bed, as if posed. Reeves had been tangled in a dangerous love triangle with the wife of MGM. Executive Eddie Mannix, a man whose connections to organized crime ran deep. When George ended the affair, threats followed. The night he died, witnesses in the house gave conflicting stories. Still, the case was shut in record time. MGM's influence reached everywhere, even the police. Reeves's mother begged for an independent investigation, but the lawyer she hired suddenly dropped the case after receiving a mysterious payment. The bullet that killed Superman was never found. Some say it wasn't just a man who died that night. It was the illusion of truth in Hollywood. And then there was Marilyn Monroe. August 5, 1962. Her body was found in her Brentwood home, face down. Nude, an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside her. The world cried, and the headlines read, "Probable suicide." But almost nothing about the scene made sense. There was no glass of water to swallow all those pills, no residue in her stomach. The time of death kept changing, her phone records vanished, and her diary, the one she told friends contained her secrets about powerful men, was gone. Marilyn had been romantically linked to both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert, and that connection had become dangerous. She was talking about going public. Hours before her death, witnesses claimed to see Robert Kennedy at her house, something he later denied. The first police who arrived said the body had been moved, the room staged. Even the toxicology reports disappeared. FBI and CIA files later revealed she was under surveillance in her final months. Whatever she knew, it terrified people in high places. The truth died with her, buried beneath politics, power, and fear. Monroe's death wasn't just the end of a star. It was the moment America realized even beauty and fame couldn't protect you from the machinery of control. 2 decades later, another mystery rose from the ocean. Natalie Wood, the brilliant actress from West Side Story, was found floating off Catalina Island in November 1981. She was wearing a nightgown, socks, and a down jacket. The coroner called it an accidental drowning. But Natalie had been terrified of dark water since childhood. She never would have gone near that dinghy alone in the middle of the night. On board the yacht that night were her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and co-star Christopher Walken. The men argued. The captain heard shouting, then silence. Hours passed before anyone called for help. When Natalie's body was found, bruises covered her wrists and face. The case was closed quickly, but years later, it was reopened. The coroner changed the cause of death to drowning and other undetermined factors. Detectives named Wagner a person of interest, citing his shifting stories and refusal to cooperate. Her sister still believes he knows the truth. The waves may have washed away the evidence, but the stain on Hollywood's conscience remains. Then came the murder that exposed the rot behind the sitcom Smiles. Bob Crane, star of Hogan's Heroes. In 1978, he was found bludgeoned to death in his Arizona apartment. The weapon, believed to be a camera tripod, was missing. Behind his clean-cut image, Crane had been living a double life, obsessed with filming his private encounters. Hundreds of tapes, photos, and secret recordings filled his home. His friend and tech partner, John Carpenter, was the prime suspect. Blood matching Crane's type was found in Carpenter's car, but the evidence was botched. The investigation sloppy. Hollywood distanced itself immediately. The networks acted as if he'd never existed. When Carpenter was finally brought to trial years later, he was acquitted. The evidence was too contaminated, too weak. Crane's killer was never found. What remained was a cautionary tale of fame, addiction, and the lengths Hollywood would go to bury a scandal that could ruin its image. But Hollywood's first great cover-up came long before any of them. In 1921, at a wild party in San Francisco, young actress Virginia Rappi collapsed in comedian Fatty Arbuckle's hotel suite. For days later, she was dead. The newspapers exploded with lurid accusations, rape, violence, and sin. Arbuckle, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, became the villain of the decade. He was tried 3 times, and even though he was acquitted, his career was destroyed. What few knew was that the evidence had been twisted from the start. Medical experts later found Rappi likely died from a pre-existing infection, not assault. Witnesses were bribed, papers sensationalized every rumor, and the district attorney used the case to boost his career. Arbuckle was sacrificed to save the industry's image. Out of his tragedy came the creation of Hollywood's morality code, the hiring of fixers, and the invention of the studio system's favorite trick, controlling the narrative at any cost. From that moment on, Hollywood learned that when scandal threatened, truth would always come second. Another forgotten tragedy struck in 1943 when actor David Bacon, star of the masked Marvel, stumbled bleeding onto a Los Angeles sidewalk. He was shirtless, stabbed once in the back with surgical precision, and died within minutes. His car contained a camera with undeveloped film that police never processed. Then his belongings, letters, journals, photographs, all vanished. The official story was unknown assailant, and the case closed quietly. But rumors persisted. Bacon, though married, was secretly gay, involved in an underground world that included powerful Hollywood figures, military officers, even politicians. He was reportedly making films that could have exposed names too powerful to reveal. The stab wound was professional, not a robbery, not a lover's quarrel. It looked like a silencing. Within days, his apartment was emptied, his papers destroyed, and his widow was warned to stop asking questions. Hollywood erased him completely. No tributes, no headlines, no legacy. He had known too much, and in Hollywood, that could be fatal. And then there was Ted Healy, the man who created the Three Stooges. In 1937, he was found dead after a night out at the Trocadero nightclub. The official report said he died of alcoholism. But witnesses saw something else, a brutal beating at the hands of actor Wallace Beery and a young producer named Albert R. Broccoli, the same man who would later bring James Bond to life. Healy had been arguing with them before he collapsed. His face was swollen, his ribs broken. MGM's fixers moved fast, spiriting Beery out of the country until the scandal cooled down. The studio changed the story, rewrote the reports, and insisted Healy had simply drunk himself to death. The press printed what they were told. And the truth disappeared beneath the clinking glasses and laughter of Hollywood's most glamorous nightclub. The men accused went on to live successful lives. Ted Healy's name faded into a punchline. The man who made others laugh but never got his own justice. From Paul Byrne to Marilyn Monroe. From Natalie Wood to Bob Crane, each story shares the same chilling pattern. Fame, mystery, and a system designed to protect itself. When death arrived, the studios moved faster than the police. They controlled the stories, shaped the evidence, and fed the public whatever version of the truth kept the money flowing and the scandals quiet. Behind every smiling movie poster and glittering premiere, there were bodies, lies, and broken lives buried in the hills of Los Angeles. These were more than tragedies. They were warnings that in the kingdom of Hollywood, truth was never free. It was bought, rewritten, or erased. And sometimes, those who came too close to revealing it never lived to tell their story. In Hollywood's golden years, fame was a fragile thing, bright, glittering, but dangerous to touch. Behind the silver screens and the soft smiles, there were stories that no camera ever caught. Fame gave everything, love, power, immortality, but it demanded a price. Some paid with their peace, others paid with their lives. It began with Ted Healy, the brilliant but troubled man who gave the world the Three Stooges. He was a man who could make anyone laugh, yet he rarely smiled himself. In 1937, after a night of celebration at the famous Trocadero nightclub, Ted stumbled out into the Los Angeles night, beaten, dazed, and gasping for breath. Hours later, he was dead. The official report said alcohol poisoning, but the bruises told another story. His face was swollen, ribs broken, and his head bore marks of a violent attack. Witnesses whispered about a brawl involving MGM actor Wallace Beery and young producer Albert Broccoli, men far too powerful to accuse. Within days, Beery was conveniently sent abroad on an extended vacation, and MGM's fixers began rewriting the story. Studio boss Louis B. Mayer made the call. Ted's death would be blamed on his drinking, nothing more. The papers printed the studio's version, and the truth disappeared into smoke. Beery came home a few months later, his reputation untouched. Ted Healy's name faded from Hollywood's memory, the man who created laughter but died alone, silenced by the very world he helped entertain. A few years later, Another tragedy unfolded, one wrapped in glamour, fear, and unbearable loneliness. Lupe Velas, the Mexican Spitfire of the silver screen, was one of Hollywood's brightest stars. She was bold, beautiful, and unapologetically herself in a time when women were expected to play by men's rules. But behind the fiery image, she was breaking. Her love affair with actor Harold Raymond had turned cold. She discovered she was pregnant, and in those days, an unmarried actress expecting a child could lose everything. On December 13, 1944, Lupe prepared her home as if for a scene in one of her films. She lit candles, dressed in her finest gown, and placed fresh flowers by her bedside. Then she took a bottle of Seconal tablets, washed them down with brandy, and lay down to sleep forever. That was the story Hollywood told. But others whispered something else, that she hadn't planned to die, only to stage a dramatic moment to scare her lover into returning. They said she vomited after taking the pills, panicked, slipped in the bathroom, and hit her head. The scandal was sanitized, the pain rewritten as art. The newspapers called her death a tragic romance. But her close friends knew better. They said Lupe's greatest heartbreak wasn't the man who left her. It was an industry that never let her be more than a stereotype. Her final words, written in a note, read simply, "To Harold, may God forgive you, and forgive me too." But even that note was rumored to have been altered by the studio before reporters ever saw it. Hollywood moved on, as it always did. But the shadows only grew longer. In 1924, the industry's quiet power broker, Thomas Innes, set sail on William Randolph Hearst's yacht for what was supposed to be a birthday celebration. Also aboard was actress Marion Davies, Hearst's mistress, and none other than Charlie Chaplin, who was rumored to be closer to Davies than Hearst liked. Champagne flowed, jealousy burned, and by the next morning, Thomas Inge was dead. The official story said a sudden heart attack. But everyone who'd been on the yacht that night seemed to tell a different tale. Some swore they heard a gunshot. Others claimed Inchef was shot by mistake, that Hearst had meant to kill Chaplin in a jealous rage. The coroner's report vanished. The body was cremated before an autopsy could be done, and the witnesses paid off one by one. Marion Davies was never the same. Chaplin refused to speak about it for the rest of his life. Hearst's newspapers ran headlines insisting everything was fine, and for the most part, people believed him, but for decades after. Hollywood insiders whispered about the man who died on Hearst's yacht. Inge's name faded into rumor, his films forgotten. What really happened that night on the Oneida remains one of Hollywood's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Then came William Desmond Taylor, the dashing, cultured director who seemed to have everything. He was admired, respected, and adored by actresses across the silent film era. But he also had secrets, a troubled past, mysterious lovers, and enemies no one could quite identify. On February 1, 1922, Taylor was found dead in his bungalow, shot in the back. His wallet still full, his watch untouched. Nothing had been stolen. It was no robbery. At least 4 women claimed to have loved him, including actress Mabel Normand, who had visited him just hours before. There was also the young starlet Mary Miles Minter, whose infatuation with Taylor had become an obsession. Her mother, Charlotte Shelby, fiercely disapproved and was rumored to have confronted him. She owned the same rare caliber gun that killed him. The investigation was a circus. Studios bribed police to keep the scandal contained. Reporters camped outside the scene, inventing stories. Evidence vanished, witnesses disappeared, and within weeks the case collapsed. The killer was never found. Mabel Normand's career crumbled under suspicion, and she died a few years later, broken by the scandal. Charlotte Shelby fled the country. Mary Miles Minter never acted again. Hollywood learned an important lesson from that case, not about justice, but about control. From then on, the studios handled their own problems. They became experts at rewriting death itself. Decades later, George Reeves, beloved as Superman, would face that same machinery. He was found dead in his home, a single gunshot wound, a pistol nearby. They called it suicide. But those who knew him said he had no reason to die. He was planning a wedding, signing new contracts, starting over. The woman he'd left behind was the wife of a powerful MGM executive. Within hours, that connection was erased from all reports. The story became simple. Superman was depressed. End of story. But even that wasn't the end. Years passed, and whispers grew louder. A new kind of scandal was taking shape, the kind that no studio could control. In August 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found lifeless in her home. The world was shattered. The woman who embodied desire itself was suddenly gone, just 36 years old. They said she'd taken her own life. Pills, sadness, loneliness, the familiar script. But nothing about the scene made sense. There was no water glass to swallow the pills. Her body had been moved. Her phone records were wiped clean. And her red diary, said to contain the private words of presidents, was missing. She had loved and been loved by men who shaped the world, John and Robert Kennedy among them. And she had begun to speak about the things she was never meant to repeat. Neighbors saw strange cars outside her home that night. Some said Robert Kennedy himself visited her hours before she died. The police changed the timeline, then changed it again. When the case was closed, it wasn't because they found the truth. It was because the truth was too dangerous to tell. For years, those who loved her tried to reopen the investigation. They were silenced, mocked, or mysteriously intimidated. Marilyn had been more than an icon. She was a woman who wanted to be heard, but Hollywood only wanted her beauty, never her voice. In the end, her silence became her legend. Through the decades, these stories have formed the hidden history of Hollywood, a place built on dreams, but maintained by secrets. For every red carpet smile, there was someone crying alone in a dark room. For every standing ovation, a quiet tragedy waited behind the curtain. Ted Healy, Lupe Valdez, Thomas Inge, William Desmond Taylor, George Reeves. Marilyn Monroe, their deaths were different, but their stories were the same. Each of them became victims of the machine that made them stars. Each of them trusted Hollywood, and Hollywood betrayed them. But perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't that they died. It's that their truth was never told. The studios made sure of that. Behind every photograph, every press release, and every glowing obituary, there was a rewritten story, a lie polished to perfection. They called it protecting the industry, but in reality, it was protecting power and burying pain. The price of stardom has always been high. But in Hollywood's golden age, it could cost you everything, even your life.